What if you could turn your hours of sleep into a moment of deep communion with God? That question might seem impossible at first glance, but the wisdom of the saints of the Catholic Church reveals that there is indeed a way to do it. And before we go any further, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, because what you're about to discover could forever change your relationship with the Blessed Virgin Mary. Cardinal Robert Sarah, one of the most profound and prophetic voices in the Church today, brought to light a teaching that spans centuries of Catholic tradition, the transformative power of sleeping with the Rosary. This isn't about superstition. It's not magic. It's something much deeper, a childlike act of trust, a way of living in a state of continuous prayer, even when your mind is at rest. We live in a time of spiritual distraction. Our days are marked by hurry, anxiety, and the worries that consume us from the moment we wake up to the moment we close our eyes. And it's precisely in that moment, when we surrender to sleep, that we become most vulnerable. Vulnerable to temptation, to the distress that hits us in the middle of the night, to thoughts that rob us of our peace. But what if there were a way to consecrate even that moment of rest? The saints of the Catholic Church, men and women who lived in deep union with God, discovered that small gestures can carry immense spiritual meaning. And among these gestures, one stands out for its simplicity and depth: sleeping with the Rosary. It's not a church commandment, it's not a canonical obligation, but it's a sign that we want to remain united with Mary, even when our conscious mind is asleep. Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort, the great apostle of the Rosary, taught that just holding the Rosary is already a way to stay close to Mary. He understood that Marian devotion isn't limited to the words we say, but extends to the disposition of our hearts. For Montfort, every bead of the Rosary is like a link that connects us to the Mother of God. And when we sleep holding that sacred object in our hands, we're saying to Mary, "Mother, I want even my rest to be consecrated to you." This consecration of sleep isn't a new concept in Catholic spirituality. From the earliest centuries of Christianity, the Church Fathers taught the importance of watching and praying. But how can we watch when our body needs rest? How can we pray when our mind needs to shut down? The answer lies in this childlike trust that places the care of our sleeping hours into Mary's hands. Picture a small child falling asleep while holding their mother's hand. They don't need to be conscious to feel her presence. They don't need to speak to express their need for protection. The simple act of holding that hand says it all. In the same way, when we sleep with the Rosary, we are holding Mary's hand, and she, as the perfect mother, watches over us through the night. Saint Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, the saint of the Stigmata, called the Rosary his weapon. For him, the spiritual life was a constant battle against the forces of evil, and in that battle, the Rosary was his sword, his shield, his stronghold. Padre Pio understood that spiritual warfare doesn't stop when we close our eyes. On the contrary, it's often during sleep that we're most attacked. How many of us wake up disturbed by anxious dreams, by nightmares that leave us restless? Padre Pio's recommendation to sleep with the Rosary in your hands isn't just symbolic. It's a concrete act of spiritual warfare, even in sleep. It's telling the enemy of our souls, "I'm not alone, Mary is with me, and where Mary is, Christ is." That warrior-like mindset, that spiritual vigilance, turns our rest into a battlefield where God's grace acts powerfully. Saint Alphonsus Liguori, doctor of the Church and master of the spiritual life, constantly spoke of the importance of invoking Our Lady at all times. He taught that Mary is the mediatrix of all graces, that nothing we receive from God comes to us without passing through her hands. And if that's true while we're awake, how much more important is it when we're vulnerable, asleep, and unable to defend ourselves? For Saint Alphonsus, keeping the Rosary nearby while sleeping is a way to keep the soul in a state of ongoing prayer. It's about creating a spiritual atmosphere in your own bedroom, in your own bed, where Mary's presence can be felt. And that presence, that maternal protection, guards us from nighttime temptations, negative influences, and spiritual attacks that happen when our consciousness is at rest. The Rosary then becomes a shield against evil, a protection that works even when we're not fully aware. Saint John Bosco, the great educator of youth and founder of the Salesians, deeply understood something many of us forget. Faith isn't meant to live only in the intellect. It's not just something we think about or talk about. It's something we touch, carry, feel and live. For Don Bosco, real faith needed to be embodied. He encouraged the young to live their faith with their whole being, to wear medals, carry holy images, and above all to stay close to Mary, the help of Christians. To him, these weren't mere symbols or tokens. They were tangible ways of keeping the presence of God close. We are physical beings. God made us that way. And our spiritual life, far from being detached from the body, often begins precisely through physical things. The Rosary, in this sense, is not just a string of beads. It's a doorway into mystery. It's a vessel of grace. It's a silent companion that reminds us who we belong to, even in our sleep. When Don Bosco told his boys to sleep with the Rosary, he wasn't handing out quaint advice. He was forming souls. He was saying, let your faith sink so deep into your life that even your dreams are held within it. Let God's presence follow you into the quiet hours of the night. Let Mary's protection be the last thing you feel before drifting off to sleep. That's how habits of holiness are formed, not just in the chapel, but in the ordinary moments like laying your head on the pillow. And here's something important. Sleeping with the Rosary is not a magical act. It's not some automatic ticket to grace. It's part of a deeper journey, a life that wants to give every moment, every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of silence to God. It's an echo of St. Paul's call to pray without ceasing, 1 Thessalonians 5:17, not by always speaking prayers, but by turning every moment, even unconscious ones, into an offering. But how do we do that, pray without ceasing, when we have jobs, responsibilities, exhaustion? The answer isn't complicated. It's about the heart. It's about cultivating a quiet inner awareness, a spiritual posture that lets even rest become a kind of prayer. And the Rosary in our hands as we sleep becomes a symbol of that. It silently says, Lord, even when I'm not aware, I belong to you. Even as I sleep, I rest in you, through Mary. Saint Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower, beautifully lived this simplicity. She didn't work wonders or write theological masterpieces, but she showed the world that doing the smallest things with great love could move heaven. For her, holding the Rosary at night wasn't about finishing every decade perfectly. It was about trust. It was about love, a humble love that doesn't measure devotion by how much we say, but by how sincerely we love. That should be a comfort for many of us, because let's be honest, how often are we too tired, too drained to finish a Rosary at night? We start with good intentions and then sleep just takes over, and that's okay. Because in the eyes of Mary, what matters most is not our perfection, but our intention. Love shows up even in our weakness, even in our yawns, our sighs, our silence. Falling asleep with the Rosary is like whispering to Mary, I'm worn out, but I don't want to fall asleep without you. It's not the gesture of a theologian. It's the gesture of a child who simply wants to be held. And Mary understands that language more than anyone. She doesn't need us to be eloquent. She just needs us to trust. Cardinal Robert Sarah, in reviving this beautiful practice, is calling us back to something deeply human and deeply divine. In a world full of overcomplicated spiritual formulas and endless techniques, he reminds us of the raw power of simplicity. Holiness, in the end, isn't about knowing more. It's about loving more. And love often looks like small, quiet things, like holding a Rosary in the dark. And then there's this. The night is not always a gentle time. The Catholic tradition has long recognized that the spiritual world doesn't go to sleep when we do. Darkness, both literal and spiritual, has always been a time of temptation, of anxiety, of fear. Countless saints have experienced this. The night, in many ways, is a battleground. Saint Alphonsus Liguori spoke often about nighttime temptations. He knew the struggle, knew how vulnerable we become when the distractions of the day fade and the deeper battles surface. Restlessness, impure thoughts, inexplicable sorrow or fear, these can all have spiritual roots. But Mary, the one who crushes the serpent's head, has been given power to protect us even then. The Rosary, when blessed, becomes a sacramental, a channel of grace. It's not a good luck charm, it's not superstition. It's a sign that we are under heaven's care. Holding it as we sleep is like placing a shield around our soul. It's saying to the enemy, "You have no claim here. This heart belongs to Mary." St. Padre Pio once said, "The devil fears the Rosary more than exorcisms." Why? Because the Rosary doesn't just defend, it transforms. It doesn't just protect, it sanctifies. Each Hail Mary is a drop of living water cleansing the soul. And even when we're not reciting them aloud, the Rosary in our hand keeps our soul resting in grace. Over and over, stories from the lives of the saints and from ordinary people show how powerful this practice is. Those who struggled with disturbing dreams or anxiety at night found peace by simply holding the Rosary as they slept. Others who couldn't sleep at all began to rest deeply, calmly, under Mary's care. This isn't mythology, it's grace, acting in a quiet, powerful way through something God Himself has given us. Faith doesn't always need to be loud. It doesn't always need to be seen. Sometimes it's hidden in the night, in a quiet room, in a tired hand clutching a rosary. That's where miracles begin. Spiritual life isn't made up only of big moments, extraordinary mystical experiences, or heroic sacrifices. True holiness is built in small gestures, in simple practices that, repeated day after day, shape our soul in the image of Christ. And sleeping with the Rosary is exactly that, a small gesture with immense spiritual meaning. When saints recommend this practice, they aren't creating a new devotion. They are simply rediscovering something always at the heart of Catholic spirituality, the consecration of every moment of life to God. St. Paul tells us, "Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all for the glory of God." 1 Corinthians 10:31. If we must do everything for God's glory, why not also consecrate our rest? Sleep, from the biblical perspective, is not just a biological necessity. It is an act of trust. When we fall asleep, we relinquish control, become vulnerable, depend entirely on God for our continued being. That's why Psalm 4:9 says, "In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety." Sleep is in fact an act of faith, and when we go to sleep with the Rosary in our hands, we make that act of faith even more explicit. We say, "Lord, I give myself entirely to you through the hands of Mary." We acknowledge our fragility, our need for protection, our dependence on divine grace. And Mary, as mother who watches over her children, welcomes that self-surrender and intercedes for us through the night. The Catholic tradition teaches that Mary never sleeps. While we rest, she remains vigilant, praying without ceasing for each of her children. Saint Bridget of Sweden, in one of her revelations, heard Our Lady say, "I am the mother of all who invoke me with devotion," and that motherhood extends especially to our moments of greatest vulnerability. Sleeping with the Rosary is therefore a way of placing ourselves consciously under that maternal protection. It's like the child who, before drifting to sleep, asks for their parents' blessing. It is a child that does not want to fall asleep without first feeling the safety of a mother as love. And Mary, who is perfect mother, never refuses that silent request we make when we hold the Rosary. There is also another deep dimension to this practice, the gradual transformation of our inner life. The saints knew that we become what we dwell on. If we spend our days consumed with worldly things, our soul becomes worldly. If we nurture negative thoughts, our inner life turns dark. But if we keep our attention fixed on God, even in small gestures, our soul is transformed. Sleeping with the Rosary is a spiritual training. It is a way of teaching our soul to stay in prayer, even when the conscious mind rests. Over time, this practice fosters in us an interior disposition, a leaning of the heart that naturally seeks God. Little by little, we become people of continuous prayer. Saint Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort taught that true devotion to Mary means doing everything with her, by her, in her, and for her. That includes our sleep. When we consecrate our rest to Mary through the Rosary, we live that Marian spirituality fully. We allow Mary to penetrate every aspect of our life, even the most intimate and vulnerable. This consecration of sleep also prepares us for the final consecration, death. In Catholic tradition, death is called sleep in the Lord. If we learn to consecrate our daily sleep to Mary, we will also be ready to entrust our final life to her hands. Saint Thérèse of the Child. Jesus said she was not afraid of death because she knew she would sleep in the arms of Jesus. And those who sleep with the Rosary every night are, in truth, rehearsing that final sleep in the certainty of divine protection. Cardinal Sarah, by bringing this teaching of the saints back into attention, is offering us a spiritual treasure. In a culture that has forgotten the importance of prayer, living in constant agitation and permanent anxiety, he invites us to rediscover the peace that comes from trust in Mary. He shows us that holiness is not distant from us, that it can begin with a simple gesture, holding the Rosary as we fall asleep. How many people live tormented by insomnia, by nighttime anxiety, by fears that assault them in the early hours? How many wake more tired than when they went to bed, disturbed by distressing dreams? The practice of sleeping with the Rosary can be for those people the start of a transformation. Not because the Rosary is magical, but because it connects us to the source of all peace, Christ through Mary. The saints show us that spiritual life is made of small fidelities. We don't have to wait for extraordinary circumstances to begin sanctifying ourselves. We can start tonight with a simple gesture. Pick up our Rosary, hold it with love and trust, fall asleep knowing Mary watches over us. And tomorrow and the next night, repeat that gesture until it becomes second nature, until our soul learns to truly rest in God's presence. If this touched your heart and you wish to deepen your faith, subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss any reflection. Share this video with someone who needs to discover this spiritual treasure. And leave a comment. Did you already have the habit of sleeping with the Rosary? What spiritual experiences did you live with that practice? May Mary, Most Holy Mother of God and our Mother, teach us to live in a state of constant prayer. May she transform even our rest into a moment of communion with heaven. And may we, at the end of our lives, fall asleep definitively in her maternal arms to awaken in eternity beside her Son, Jesus. Thank you for watching until the end. Your presence here is a blessing. May God bless you and your family. Until the next video,